outlook for Saudi Arabia in the coming 3 years. Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned earlier, has announced 9.5 gigawatts of renewable power by 2023, but that's not only solar, and it's not all going to be implemented immediately. What we see on the horizon is 3.45 gigawatts of renewable power by 2020, which is going to be split across 4 technologies as it stands today. Close to 2 gigawatts of PV power, close to 300 megawatts of CSP, close to 1.3 gigawatts of wind power, and an additional 50 megawatts of waste to energy. The first 2 projects have already been launched with the pre-qualifications behind us, and now it's waiting for the RFP to come out. Of course, for the purpose of MESIA, the most important one is the 300 megawatts opportunity, which is in the market with the Sakaka project. For the list of pre-qualified companies, I will just refer to Appendix 1 of this presentation, which will be shared with all participants after this webinar. Now, to which extent are the solar projects that we are going to see in Saudi Arabia, to which extent are they different from what we have seen elsewhere in the conventional world in Saudi Arabia? First of all, the off-taker is slightly different. So the conventional projects, they have all been developed with either Saudi Electric Company as off-taker or Saudi Aramco. Now we are dealing with a new off-taker, which will be the Saudi Procurement Company. Previously in the conventional deals, the off-taker usually participated in the project company and was taking a stake up to 50 to 60%. Now 100% of the stake is available to the developer community, which is kind of a game changer in Saudi Arabia. Also, when it comes to the sovereign guarantees, there were actually none on the conventional projects. And now we see that for as long as SEC is going to be, let's say, government owned, they will be the financial backer of the Saudi Power Procurement Company. Thereafter, let's say that they would be only put a sovereign or a government guarantee in place in case, let's say, the credit rating of the new off-taker would fall below triple B. In terms of PPA tenor, there is not much of a difference today. We have seen PPAs of 20 to 25 years in conventional. We see also 25 years for the solar projects on a POO basis. For wind, it's slightly different. That will be 20 years. Of course, the revenue drivers will be different. Conventional projects was all about availability. Over here, we are talking about self-dispatch and PPA, so it's all resource-based, so it's very important to get confidence in the P50 and the P90 figures. And then local content requirements is a very important game changer this time around. There were no Saudization requirements, let's say, or local content requirements in the conventional projects other than, let's say, the employee levels. But what we do see now is that we see 30% of local content requirement on the CapEx. So that's going to be a challenge for the EPC contractors. On the O&M, 25% within the first 5 years, 50% within the first 10 years, and 75% within the first 15 years. So that's going to be a challenge. Now, in conclusion, how do we look at all this? We think that risk allocation is fair, and it's certainly bankable. So it means that on that particular side, we don't see any particular issues. Now, what do we see as the potential challenges for developing PV projects in Saudi Arabia? First of all, site selection will be key. So it's a key risk factor for any kind of projects. So it's going to be important to look across the different rounds as to see what will be the geotechnical conditions of the sites. And let's say every now and then hydrological studies can also be required as to see whether there's any wadis around which could represent any kind of flood risk. As with any renewable project, the resource risk and the energy production will be key. So it's important to get reliable satellite data and reliable ground data before moving on with the PV projects. For PV, it's slightly less of a risk compared to CSP projects, which have, let's say, requirements for DNI data, in most of the cases for at least 1 year. Where we do see, let's say, that the most challenging environment is when it comes to the local content requirements, because the 30% is a kind of difficult to meet, especially in the first kind of rounds, where, let's say, the local supplier base might not be established. So if we look at, let's say, the Saudi nationals, which count to Saudization, it's good and, let's say, required to have them in the construction of the project, but in reality, the day-to-day jobs on site will be performed by non-Saudis. On top of that, it's clear that 40 to 45% will come from the panel manufacturer, which is, especially in the first round, again, not going to be Chinese, not going to be Saudi. So it means that, again, it's overall going to be difficult to meet the 30% threshold. GCC climate will be an important element to take into account when we look at solar PV, especially the soiling risk will be a key issue. So cleanliness factor of the panels will be a key element. When you look at the O&M, the cleaning cycle will be important. How many cleaning cycles will people do implement? For which kind of solution will they opt? Will they go for manual cleaning? Will they use robotics? Or will they use some sort of trucking kind of solution? And last but not least, like for every, let's say, project, environmental considerations will be important to look at, let's say, what kind of species might be living on the site and to which extent might they be affected. It's probably less, again, of an issue for PV projects, but going forward for CSP projects, it might become slightly more challenging, because then bird monitoring studies and active and passive management strategies might be required on CSP projects. This is in a nutshell, let's say, what we see as risks, but what do we see then as likely pricing trends? By just looking at the number of pre-qualified companies, we see a very strong developer community. So plenty of companies have been pre-qualified both on the local side and the international side. So it will be very important for each of these players to determine the right kind of EPC strategy as to whether, let's say, they go on an EPCM or a fully wrapped kind of basis, as to whether they have, let's say, a panel producer in their consortium or not. These are all going to be key drivers of trying to achieve the lowest kind of leg. Pricing for key components, panels and inverters, we have seen even compared to last year that in the early bids for 2017, the pricing for panels came further down. So it's a likely trend that is going to continue, of course, if going forward local content requirements are going to play a more important role. That might actually be something to keep in mind, because it might be driving up the cost, as we have seen lately in the Turkish bid. Balance of plant, local content, very important, as mentioned before. Now the program is of sufficient scale, which means that, let's say, both the industrial basis is already available in Saudi Arabia, and they have the capability to ramp it up. So there is for sure in the future rounds the ability to make it all work. The other good thing about Saudi Arabia is that there is abundant liquidity in Saudi Riyal available, and there will most likely be enough appetite for rolling mini perms, making sure that a kind of very competitive tariff can be achieved. So that's in a nutshell how we as Messia look at the solar projects and the solar pipeline in Saudi Arabia. Towards the end, let's say, of this webinar, we would like to ask one question to the audience, and that's namely to ask you whether you think that the LCOE for the Sakaka project will be lower than the ones we have observed last year in the UAE. So based on this, I would like to give the floor back to Belen to introduce the next speaker, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim. Yes, as Wim has told you, we will ask you later on a little bit more on your opinion on how sort of the prices will end up in this first tender. But we'll leave it for after the presentations. Next is Yusuf Makoum from Africom. Yusuf, can you share the screen with us and tell us about the transactional / financial side of things?
Thank you, Belen. Let me try to sort out indeed the technology. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And
thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much. Yusuf Makoum, partner at Africom. We're a financial advisory and strategy consultancy, very active in the region, especially in Saudi. And thank you very much for the opportunity to presenting today. At Africom, we focus a fair bit of our time in trying to assess where the solar market is going in each region, especially in the Middle East. And actually, we publish PV installed capacity forecasts for some of our privileged clients. In this slide, I have tried to show a little bit where we see things going in the region and the place of Saudi Arabia in that context. Dare I say, from a modest beginning, unfortunately, due to a few abortive starts, we believe that Saudi in a few years will get into a leadership position in the region and will be among the countries at the forefront of PV IPP deployment. Why do we believe that? There are several factors for that. Perhaps I'm going to turn to the next slide. There we go, sorry. A couple of factors that lead us to believe that, but fundamentally, number one, decisive procurement, and number two, strong fundamentals. Saudi Arabia clearly is a powerhouse economically in the region. However, on the renewable side, due to some stakeholder lack of alignment in the last few years, they have somewhat lagged behind some of the competing countries nearby. At the same time, why do we believe fundamentals are strong? Because firstly, they have a strong track record of attracting foreign direct investment. Secondly, they have a strong credit and quite a mature banking sector with a number of international and local players that have significant appetite. Thirdly, quite a mature power industry, actually with a regulated utility that is investment grade, that has already implemented some large IPPs, as Wim already highlighted. And as importantly, managing quite a mature power grid that is quite large. So the sort of scale that we are talking about today are quite easy to absorb from the perspective of Saudi Arabia. And finally, of course, they're blessed with significant and attractive renewable resource. And in our case, for our discussion purposes, solar resource. But of course, quite uniquely in the region, quite strong wind resource as well, although that's not subject matter for today. So then I guess the missing factor was in the last few years, the decisive implementation of procurement. And we strongly believe that this time it is very much best practice that is being followed. Very clear organization and responsibilities, and complete unison of the stakeholders under the leadership of REPTO within the Ministry of Energy, which seems to be really following quite a disciplined execution. This may sound trivial, but from the perspective of practitioners like us who've been in the markets, in my case, over the last 20 years, and have seen a number of countries trying and in some cases not managing to take off, we believe that this will be key. And I think the several rounds, the 6 rounds that have been announced and the total megawatts that have been announced that are large enough but not unrealistic, always, again, point to further comfort in relation to this decisiveness. And of course, all of that being kind of put in the context of clear support from the highest levels of government under the Vision 2030, which incorporates, as I mentioned, the renewable energy target, the rounds envisaged, the progressive liberalization of the market, but also some strong sustainability requirements that include, indeed, significant localization that Wim has touched upon, which will be challenging, but hopefully, given the Saudi industrial landscape, we see There's a lot of concentration to make that reality. We do represent quite a few players in that market, trying to today very proactively establish capacity with a view to meeting the demands of this investment plan. And of course, walking the walk, as it were, from the procurement perspective, will be essential in supporting those efforts as opposed to frustrating them in the years to come. And with all of that happening, we see indeed that Saudi will become, maybe together with the UAE in the region, one of the key leaders come 2021, for example. This has led to a lot of appetite, as Wim had highlighted. I just want to quickly mention, indeed, here you can see the names of the parties that have pre-qualified. You need a managing member as well as a technical member to be able to bid. So there's about 10 companies who pre-qualified as managing member and technical member, and then in addition to that, there is about 8 managing members on top of that. So in theory, there could be as many as 18 bids. Of course, there will probably not be 18 bids, but the potential competition and appetite on the equity side is there, and that was there before the RFP was announced. A few drivers for that. I think it's worth commenting. Firstly, I think the transactions were right-sized. The fact that there's one 300 and one 400 megawatt opportunity, and that comes, it is neither too small for some of the larger players, but neither too big to challenge liquidity levels in the market, etc. Secondly, the fact that it again comes into a series of waves that will be pursuing attracts a number of people because they can see that there will be follow-on opportunities, and there will be opportunities to improve on the initial bids to be able to secure future investments. So with that, I wanted to also touch upon the financing dynamics. Clearly, in Saudi Arabia, there's always a dual currency thought process. We raise Saudi riyals or we raise US dollars, although they are currently pegged. There are a number of dynamics in relation to the custodians of the Saudi riyal liquidity, namely Saudi banks, their dollar liquidity or challenges associated with that. And in addition to that, international bank appetite. But we see today quite strong appetite both from Saudi and from international players. So we do not anticipate any issue in relation to absorbing the first 2 deals from commercial banks without requiring much export credits involvement. And indeed, Wim touched upon it. There's the optimization between the soft mini-perm structures and term amortizing structures that will be quite topical, we believe. Associated with that is the bid time frame. I think the bid time frame is quite generous compared to some precedents. It's realistic, about 5 months from RFP to first bid on the Sakaka project, which hopefully should provide some reassurance to the bidding community. But at the same time, we hear that the RFP is quite demanding. I mean, it's obviously confidential, and I wouldn't want to necessarily go into the details of that. But the pre-bid requirements from the perspective of financing are not insignificant, which probably is fair. I mean, in a market that's quite mature like Saudi Arabia, there are a number of precedents that have been able to deliver that. And from a deliverability perspective for the first renewable deal, it is probably only fair. So strong equity and strong bank interest. Yeah, $1 million question. Will it reach the 3 cents LCOEs? We will see. But we anticipate that some aggressive structuring will be possible with the level of financing sizes required, and hopefully the RFP will accommodate that. A number of other factors come into that, of course, like the base rates and how will they evolve in terms of US dollars. What will be the actual cost of meeting the 30% localization requirements, and what the impact of that will be on LCOEs. But leaving those aside, I think there will be very strong competitive structuring. That's pretty much it from me. I'm looking forward to the Q&A. And over to Mohammed, I guess.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Yeah, we've got now Arif and Tim, dream team from Eversheds. I understand that you guys are going to organize amongst yourselves how you pass the conversation. So go ahead, share your screen and tell us.
Okay. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tim Armsby. I lead the energy and infrastructure practice of Evershed Sutherland in the Middle East. Here today with my colleague Arif, who's a corporate partner based in Saudi Arabia. Just briefly, for those of you who don't know us, we are a leading international law firm, but we're particularly well known for our focus on renewable energy, and not just as a legal advisor, but as a participant trying to steer policy and raise market awareness across the Middle East. For myself, very happy to be here today talking about Saudi Arabia. I think for a lot of us, Saudi Arabia is what kicked it off a good few years ago now. And it's nice that we've turned full circle and actually have a procurement program underway. Just briefly, in terms of the presentations coming, we're not looking at the project documentation in any detail. As has been mentioned, that is following the conventional banked precedent. And for those of you like ourselves who participated on the recent Al Juf and Rafa SEC tender, the documentation will have a few surprises over and above the new local content requirements. On that point now, I'd like to pass over to Arif.
So just before Arif starts talking, can you please put it in full screen for us first so that we can see it better? Arif, you just have to press there where it says display settings and choose the first option.
Just give me a second.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Right. Tim, can you please mute your... Right. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Muhammad Arif Said, and I'm a partner with Eversheds, president of Saudi office, and I've been around for over a decade in Saudi, looking after the corporate commercial practice. Now, today's presentation is going to be covering the following overview. First of all, I'll just give a very brief introduction to the opportunities that the renewable energy program has to offer to foreign investors in KSA. Moving on to the Saudi regulatory regime, which will cover most part of my presentation. And thirdly, the timeline for setting up business presence in Saudi Arabia. Now, typically, a project structure would look something like this. Parties will join hands to set up a joint venture or even come in as wholly owned operation to become developers of renewable projects, PPA, power purchase agreements, and grid connections to be executed with government counterparties, PPA, of course, and other agreements. Then with private parties, we will have EPC contracts, operation and management, and maintenance contracts, and of course the debt financing with local or international players. We understand that there can be other structures also possible, keeping in view the client requirements and tax considerations for various purposes. Now, this slide basically covers the various options that are available for foreign investors. They can come in Saudi Arabia as project developers and develop and own project assets. They can provide services in the local market for various projects, and these can be EPC, O&M, project management, or asset management services. of course, manufacturing and industrial supply chain be part of the local content, and also construction, which is available to 100% foreign ownership as well, although we see in our experience a very high competition in this area. Now, an important point is that all these areas are open to 100% foreign ownership, as we will discuss further down. Right, so basically the Saudi regulatory corporate regime is covers the general law of Saudi Arabia, what the National Renewable Energy Program is about, and REPTO. Then foreign investment laws, companies law become relevant because of the requirements for setting up various kinds of vehicles in Saudi Arabia. I'll briefly touch upon Saudization and Nitakat, and then finally the timeline for all these things. Sorry, I think sorry for that. So general law, the fundamental law of Saudi Arabia is Sharia, which is a principle of basically combination of various principles of religious sources, and there is no civil code in Saudi Arabia. There is no law of contract, and the general principles of Sharia, they govern basically any contractual arrangements between parties. That is why it is important for parties to make sure that their agreements are Sharia compliant. We see that there is a general tenders and government tenders and procurement law, and the contractual arrangements between developers and the government entities would generally be governed by the principles of government tenders and procurement law. Also, the RFP and procurement process will be dictated by government tenders and procurement law. The Saudi government agencies cannot enter into contracts with any law other than Saudi law as the governing law, and generally they have to agree to Saudi courts as having exclusive jurisdiction. There can be exceptions, but for that the government agencies require an exception of Council of Ministers, which is rarely granted. Then we have a new arbitration law in place, and also we have new enforcement courts, which have enabled the enforcement of foreign arbitral awards in the country as well, which was previously more challenging. And a new arbitration and mediation center has also been established in Saudi. So this is the overall general legal environment of the country. I'm not going to go too much into these slides. I think it would suffice to say that the risks associated with acquiring land rights have been eliminated because of the fact that under the present regime, REPTO will arrange to provide the land through solar parks. As far as the pre-bid stage is concerned, parties can form MOU or teaming agreements and enter into and submit their bids. There is no requirement for having a local legal presence prior to at this pre-bidding stage. Once a letter of award has been issued, parties can proceed with setting up their legal presence, and the time required for setting up a legal presence in Saudi is crucial, and I will touch on that in a later slide. The licensing regime, basically, it will be covered under the next slide, which is regarding foreign investments. So we have a foreign investment law, which basically provides national treatment to any project which is established pursuant to foreign investment license. Any foreign investor, which means any non-GCC investor, will require to have obtained a a foreign investment license from the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority. The foreign investment law also gives rights for repatriation of dividends and capital upon liquidation and protection against expropriation. There are certain market access restrictions, and basically, I will just touch upon a couple of things here. It is possible to make direct sales to end customers in Saudi, but then that is required for the customer to import the products. If any services are provided on offshore basis, they are subject to withholding tax of up to 15%. There can be distribution and commercial agency channels, but these are only for 100% Saudi owned entities to operate as distributors or commercial agents. The foreign direct investment law, and this basically requires Saudi, as I've discussed, the Saudi license for any foreign investor. The investment license is linked with the activities and is generally granted for 1 year period and is renewable subject to the meeting of performance indicators. Now, as far as types of foreign investment licenses are concerned, we will share this slide later on with you, but what it basically provides is that for each type of license, there are different requirements and what can be done under those licenses and whatnot. Generally, for developers, we have had meetings with Saudi, and we have been informed that they will be issuing a special license, the life of which will be linked with the concession of the project. So if the PPA is for 25 years, then the life of the investment license will be 25 years as well. Apparently, Saudi is working on reducing the requirements and timeline for setting up of, for obtaining this license and setting up of entities which are going for to operate as developers. For all other licenses, normally they are issued for 1 year and are renewable. So going back, I'll just touch upon the TCR, which is a temporary commercial registration, and this option is available for foreign investors where they do not need a SAGIA license because they have a government contract. And the life of this commercial registration is linked with the life of the government contract as well. So this is also one of the options. Sorry, I think it just jumped back. So, yeah. So companies law provides for various types of vehicles that can be set up. So limited liability companies, joint stock companies, and even a branch can be set up where 100% ownership is allowed. There are no minimum capital requirements under the companies law, but both SAGIA and the Ministry of Commerce and Investments have their own guidelines on the kind of activities and the capital investment required for that. Typically, for a service license, 500,000 Saudi riyals is required. For an industrial license, a minimum of 1 million Saudi riyals is required. A limited liability company is the most common form of joint venture setup in Saudi. And the management and control of LLC is more flexible, and parties can opt for management through a general manager or a board of directors, and none of them have to be a Saudi resident in case of a foreign investor. Dividends are subject to withholding tax of up to 5%, and there is a requirement for setting up a statutory reserve for any company, which 10% of profits every year have to be deposited in a statutory reserve until it gets up to 30% of the total paid-up capital of the company. I won't touch a lot on this because Saudization and Nitakat is a system whereby Saudi have introduced requirements for each company to have a number of Saudi employees. The minimum number is 10%, but it can go up to 70-75% based on the size of the entity and the activities of the business activities of the entity. So this is a timeline. So from pre-bidding to approval of bid, as I've said, it can be based on a teaming agreement or an MOU. But then we have applications for setting up legal presence SAGIA license. It takes around 30 days to issue a SAGIA license from the date all the applications have, all the documents have been submitted. From there, another 25 days to complete all the other registrations. And the issuance of commercial registration takes another 10 days, and completing all the other registrations with various government authorities may take up to another 60 days. So in all, we are looking at 3 months for setting up, around 3 months or more for setting up an entity in Saudi. Yeah, so that brings my presentation to an end. I'm sorry if I have exceeded the allocated time.
I have a question for you just before you get off. If you go back in your presentation, there was a slide there that you had like a schematic, and there is a question here for you. In the schematic, you had a SH in one of the boxes at the beginning, and we're asking for, there's a question here for clarification as to what this SH, no, go back.
That would mean shareholders. I think that is one of the first or second slides, like this one.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, so this means shareholders. So the shareholders who are joining hands to set up the local entity. Okay. So whoever are the investors in the investing shareholders in the developer.
Just wanted to clarify it before we move on, because it's one of those very specific questions that are hard to. So sure. You can now stop sharing the screen. I'm gonna just throw the poll, if that's okay with you guys out there. Let's hear from people who are listening to us. And here's the poll. It's simple. You can all vote. Just pick one of the options. Okay, I'm gonna give you a few seconds. And is, will the PPA price for Sakaka be lower than the one observed in the UAE? So please give us your opinions. We'll leave it a few more seconds. Wim, I had a question. There was a question here that asked where Sakaka was exactly. Can any of you, actually, I said Wim because you were the one that mentioned it, but anyone can explain where that is exactly, just to answer that question?
So Sakaka is actually a city in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. Okay.
Right, so I'm gonna do a countdown here. I'm gonna give you a few more seconds, okay, to get your votes in. We still have a bunch of people who haven't voted, so please take those few seconds to vote. The more votes, the better. There's no wrong questions because, you know, no one has a crystal ball and knows the future. So it's just to get an understanding of what you guys are thinking. So will the PPA price for solar PV and Sakaka be lower than the one observed in the UAE? And the answers are either yes, no, or not sure. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm gonna end the polling now. And here are the results. I hope you can see. Let me just share them right there. So you can see them now. The answer is 27% is saying yes, some people are saying no, and some people are saying not sure. Not everybody has voted, unfortunately, but you get an idea of what people are thinking. So I thought everybody was going to say yes, quite honestly, but I'll leave it up to you to comment. So a few questions that have come your way. So somebody here asked whether 30% of CapEx local content requirement is on the high side. Anyone wants to take that question? They think 10 gigawatts by 2023, is it good enough to justify 30% local content CapEx? Who could take that question?
Okay. On the first one, so 30% local content requirement for a first off might seem a little bit on the higher side because it usually takes time to set up a supply chain. So it will be very important for bidders to look into what is available in the Saudi market already today and try to make it work within those boundaries. But typically, if we look at countries like Morocco, who have jump-started solar with mass and many years back, they were less ambitious in the first round and started off with.
Okay, there is a question here about localization. I guess this one would be for you, Aref. It's what is considered localization for PV? Is it simply assembly of PV panels using local auxiliary materials, except for cells, or more upstream investment? Either Aref or Tim, I don't know who wants to take that question.
I'm happy to attempt to answer it. My read of the RFP is that it is not pure assembly. The goods have to be certified of Saudi origin to be eligible to count towards the 30%.
Okay, so the rules of origin are in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It has to be manufactured there.
That's right.
Okay, and is electricity deemed a service or a product under KSA law? This is John Nolan Lockton asked this question.
I think this is a good question, and the way Sargia is looking at it is that they are treating it as a special industry for which a special license will be allocated, as I've said in the presentation. So whether it is treated as a service or as a product, it is going to be covered under a specific license. They have not clearly specified how they are going to treat it.
Thank you very much. And here is one, I guess, for the three of you, which is quite broad, but I think very interesting, is, where this topic gets, not only in Saudi Arabia, but in general. What do you think will be the present trend of EPC and BOS prices in Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries as a whole? So it's about this whole EPC and BOS conversation that we can talk about all day long. Who wants to take it?
Okay, let me give it a try. So when we talk about balance of system, I think there is certainly a trend across the GCC and even the MENA region to see prices coming down. A lot has to do with, let's say, the scale that solar has reached, and also the level of standardization of, let's say, balance of system kind of products which are made available. So that's the first thing. When it comes to the solar panels itself, it will depend on how, let's say, Saudi Arabia will involve in terms of market, as to whether they are really looking forward to the localization of production of panels, which would probably have a tendency to drive up the pricing, because it's all a matter of ramping up and scaling the technology. And maybe the best example is the results of the tender that we have seen in Turkey lately, which came with the requirement of setting up a local manufacturing facility, which clearly has driven up the price.
Okay, there is a couple of questions also here that are regarding timelines for the announcement, for tender submission deadlines. I think we've gone over this, but perhaps just to qualify that and repeat it, and also the SAGIA licensing requirements if you have a government contract. So I don't know who wants to take those questions, or maybe separate.
Right, I'll take the
I'm happy
SAGIA
to
license.
take the timeline question. Okay, please. Okay,
so I'll go first, and I'll take this question about the SAGIA licensing requirements. And I think this is specifically in relation to temporary commercial registration, TCR, where I mentioned that there has to be a government contract for that. To begin with, a license to develop a renewable energy project will not be covered under TCR, because a TCR is set up as a branch of the foreign entity. And secondly, SAGIA is issuing a special license for developers. So this kind of a TCR is only available where a very specific contract is entered into with a government entity for construction or service purposes. And the life of the TCR, temporary registration, is linked with the life of that particular contract only. We can provide more details if needed later on.
Excellent. So in terms of the timeline, Yusuf, can you clarify? And also, there's an extra question here about a second bidding, when it may start. So perhaps you want to bundle all in one answer.
I didn't get the second question, but the timeline for the bids is around about early September, and the selection of a preferred bidder will take about 2 months. So that's the target timeline on Sakaka. What was the second question?
The second question was regarding the next round of the bidding, so the second bidding, when it may start.
The second round, I don't have it on top of my mind, but we can come back, I'm sure. I don't know whether any other panelists has it handy. We can come back on that.
I think all we know at the moment is at the briefing session that was held a couple of weeks ago, they seem to be indicating they might start the process for the second round before the end of this year. But I guess that's contingent on progressing the first round.
Yeah, one of the viewers are actually saying here fourth quarter, so you can expect it soon, I guess. We don't really have a lot more time, unfortunately. We're going to have to wrap up, but I'm going to try. There is a couple of questions here about battery storage, which is not something necessarily that has been considered in the tender, but kind of the questions here is there any provision or any indication that there may be a provision in the future for energy storage? So I guess the question here is whether, above and beyond the technical question, and a price question, is whether there is a need for value system to the grid in KSA. So I don't know if any of you wants to take this question, or who wants to take this question?
For the time being, we don't see any, let's say, upcoming tenders for battery storage. And the reason is that with, let's say, the low level of penetration of renewables into the GCC market, there is not yet a situation where you have excess capacity from renewables, as one might observe, for example, in countries like Germany, where you have a lot of wind and a lot of solar on the grid. So for the first, let's say, kind of tenders, we won't see anything like it. On top of that, and that's maybe a question also for Mohamed and Tim, it's also true that the regulatory framework is not yet in place across the GCC for either like residential storage or even storage at the level of the transmission system or the distribution system.
I wanted to add one element, though, which is that you may have noticed, and I don't know where the tender stands actually, but that SEC last year tendered 100 megawatts or so of demand response. So this is not storage, obviously. It is using, let's say, technology agnostic ways of modulating and controlling demand. Which could, in theory, have incorporated storage, but typically it's probably one of the more expensive ways of achieving that. So that's just by way of actually demonstrating that the stakeholders have such, let's say, ancillary means of controlling the demand-supply balance quite close to their heart. So I agree with Wim that it's probably not imminent, but I'm pretty sure that the stakeholders are working on non-generation based ways of addressing supply and demand.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there if that's okay, because we have a few more questions, but they're pretty specific. There's one about PPA prices that I don't know if anyone could even answer, but I will just ask my colleague to load the very specific. We have an announcement. Wim, we're announcing that MESIA is organizing a trade mission in Saudi. And I'd just like to put this up. And when could you give us a few words about this event and sort of what's happening, what you're hoping, that is achieved there?
Okay, very well. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. So indeed, Messias would like to extend a kind invitation to all of our members and beyond to participate to a trade mission that we are organizing on the 3rd and 4th of October of this year. It will take place at the Sheraton in Riyadh, and it's a good opportunity for all of the potential interested parties and stakeholders to meet with key decision makers. So it is our intention to try and invite, let's say, people from the relevant ministries and the off-taker to come and pitch, let's say, the program, as well as giving the opportunity to interact directly with the investor, EPC, financing, and broader community. So, in a nutshell, we are planning to launch this initiative like the same way we did it for Jordan last year, and we hope that it's going to be beneficial to those which have a keen interest in working in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much, Gwen. And who would be the point of contact for anybody who wants to know more about this? Will it be Micheline Tienpoint?
Yes, indeed. So the point of contact will be Micheline Tienpoint, which is, let's say, the director of our activities within Messia. When this presentation will be shared, you will find her contact details together with the ones of Paulette Herbert. So please feel free to reach out to Messia, and we'll try to address your questions as soon as possible.
Excellent. So for this event, go to the Messia website. And without further ado, we're going to have to say goodbye. Thank you very much for all of you that participated today. Thank you very much to our talk experts as well. Thank you, Win, Yusuf, Arif, and Tim, for sharing your knowledge with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.